Snow fell in slow, deliberate silence, as if the sky itself had grown weary of noise. Each flake drifted downward with quiet purpose, settling across the crooked roof of the medic's cottage, softening its sharp edges and burying its scars beneath a blanket of white. The world had learned to imitate peace, even if it did not yet understand it. The land around the cottage stretched in long, rolling fields that had once been torn apart by marching armies. Months ago, the ground had been churned into mud by boots, stained by blood and shattered by fire. Now, under the hush of winter, it lay still, too still, almost unnaturally so. Nature had begun its slow work of forgetting. But not all wounds faded so easily. Inside the cottage, warmth flickered faintly. A low fire crackled in the hearth, its glow uneven, its heat reluctant, as though even the flames had grown tired of their duty. Shadows stretched across the stone walls, rising and falling in silent rhythm with the fire's breath. Edrin Havath sat alone beside it. Age had not bent him as much as war had hollowed him. His back remained straight, his shoulders broad, but there was a weight to him that had nothing to do with years. It clung to him in the way he moved, in the quiet heaviness of his gaze, in the slow, measured care of his hands. Those hands had once been famous. Kings had spoken his name with reverence. Soldiers had whispered it like a prayer. Enemies had cursed it when their fallen rose again under his care. The hands of mercy, they had called him. Edrin had never liked the names. Mercy, he had learned, was often just another word for surviving long enough to suffer again. Now there were no titles here. No crowds, no banners, no desperate voices crying out for help. Only silence. He held a small wooden mortar in his lap, grinding dried herbs into a fine green powder. The motion was steady, practiced, something his body remembered even when his mind wandered elsewhere. He did not need the herbs. There were no patients waiting. No wounds to bind, no fevers to break, no lives balanced on the fragile edge of his skill. Still he ground them. The rhythm anchored him. Stone against wood, grind, turn, grind. It was a familiar sound, a harmless sound, one that did not scream or beg or die. Outside, the wind stirred. It whispered along the walls, slipping through cracks in the stone, carrying with it the distant, hollow voice of winter. It was not a violent wind, not yet, but it carried a chill that felt older than the season itself. Edrin did not look up. He had long ago learned that looking toward the wind often meant seeing things he would rather forget. Instead, his gaze drifted toward the door. The satchel hung there just as it had for months. Old leather worn thin in places, darkened by rain and blood and years of use. Its straps had been mended so many times they no longer resembled the originals. It was not a noble thing, not something that belonged to legends. But it had saved more lives than any king. Edrin stared at it for a long moment. There had been a time when that satchel never left his side. He had carried it through burning cities where the air itself tried to choke the life from him, through fields where the wounded lay so thick he could not walk without stepping over them, through nights where the stars vanished behind smoke and the ground trembled with endless violence. He had opened it with shaking hands, with steady hands, with hands that had forgotten how to feel anything at all. He had filled it with hope, and emptied it of deaths, or tried to. Now it hung untouched. Waiting. Edrin exhaled slowly, setting the mortar aside. The quiet pressed in around him, thick and heavy as though it were something alive. He had once dreamed of this, of a life where the world did not scream, where his skills were not needed, where he could simply exist without choosing who lived and who died. He had earned this quiet. So why did it feel so wrong? His gaze shifted toward the fire. The flames flickered weakly, casting uncertain light across the room. They did not roar or crackle with strength. They whispered, they struggled. Like something that had forgotten how to burn. Edrin leaned forward, feeding another small piece of wood into the hearth. The fire caught it slowly, reluctantly, as though unsure whether it was worth the effort. Peace, he muttered. The word felt unfamiliar in his mouth. Let it hold. He did not expect an answer. He rarely spoke aloud anymore. But the silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. His eyes drifted shut just for a moment. And the quiet broke. Not outside. Inside. The memories did not come all at once. They never did. They slipped in like cracks in a dam, small at first, then widening until the past poured through with unstoppable force. A battlefield. Smoke thick enough to choke the sky. The smell of iron and fire. A soldier young, far too young, grabbing his sleeve with blood-slick fingers, begging him not to leave. "I don't want to die," the boy had whispered. Edrin had lied. "You won't." He had said it with certainty, with conviction, with the practiced ease of someone who had told that lie too many times. The boy had died anyways. Another memory followed. A different field, a different war, though they all blurred together in the end. A commander screaming at him to save the officers first, to let the common soldiers wait, to let them bleed. Edrin had ignored him. He had always ignored them. Life was life, rank meant nothing when the body failed. It had earned him enemies. It had also earned him the name they still whispered. The hands of mercy. His eyes snapped open. The fire still burned. The cottage still stood. The war was over. He told himself that again. The war is over. It had to be. There were no armies left to fight, no banners raised, no horns calling men to die. Only snow. Only silence. Only. The sound came so suddenly that for a moment he thought it was part of the memory. A low tremor. Barely there. Edrin stilled. His head tilted slightly, his body going rigid in a way it had not for months. There it was again. A faint vibration beneath the floor. Not wind. Not settling stone. Something else. Something heavy. Something moving. Slowly. Deliberately. Edrin did not rise immediately. War had taught him patience. Had taught him that reacting too quickly often meant reacting too late. Instead, he listened. The tremor came again, stronger this time, enough to send a faint shiver through the walls, enough to loosen a small cascade of snow from the roof. Edrin's hand moved without thought. It reached for the satchel. His fingers closed around the worn leather, gripping it with a familiarity that felt both comforting and deeply unsettling. He stood. The quiet outside shifted. The wind picked up, swirling snow against the walls in restless patterns. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then, the knock. It was not a knock as any human would make. There were no knuckles, no measured taps, no hesitation. It was a presence. A pressure. A weight against the door that made the wood groan softly in protest. Edrin froze. His heart began to pound, not with fear alone but with something older, something ingrained. Recognition. He knew this feeling. He had felt it before battles, before ambushes, before the moment when everything changed and nothing could be undone. Danger. His grip on the satchel tightened. Run. The instinct rose immediately. He was old, the wars were over. Whatever stood outside was not his responsibility. He had earned his peace. He could leave. He could slip out the back, disappear into the snow, let the world deal with whatever had come knocking. It would not be the first time he had chosen survival. But his feet did not move. They never had. Not when it mattered. The pressure against the door shifted. Careful, measured, as though whatever stood outside understood its own strength and feared it. That more than anything unsettled him. Predators did not fear their own power. They reveled in it. This was something else. Edrin took a slow step forward. Then another. The floor creaked softly beneath his weight, the sound impossibly loud in the heavy silence. His hand hovered near the latch. He hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of certainty. Whatever waited on the other side of that door would change everything. Again, he exhaled and opened it. The cold struck him first. Sharp, immediate, cutting through the warmth of the cottage like a blade. Snow swirled in, carried by a sudden gust of wind, scattering across the floor in delicate, melting patterns. And then, he saw her. For a moment, his mind refused to understand. The shape was too large. Too impossible. Too far removed from the quiet world he had convinced himself was real. A dragon stood before him. Her form filled the space beyond the doorway, vast and overwhelming. Even crouched low to the ground, she towered over the cottage, her body coiled in restrained power. Her scales caught what little light the storm allowed, shimmering like frost-covered steel, not the bright, gleaming shine of polished armor, but something older, weathered, worn. Battle warns. Edrin's breath caught. He had seen dragons before. Not up close. Not like this. Only from a distance during the worst days of the war, when the sky itself had burned, and shadows had passed overhead like living storms. They had been weapons then. Terrible, unstoppable weapons. But this was not the same. Her wings were torn. Not cleanly as they would be in battle, but ragged, ripped in places, scarred in others. One hung slightly lower than the other, its membrane marked with jagged lines that spoke of pain, not glory. Her sides rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths. She was exhausted, injured, and her eyes. Edrin had expected rage, or hunger, or the cold, distant intelligence of something that saw humans as lesser beings. Instead, he found desperation. It burned there unmistakable, cutting through everything else. Desperation and fear. The realization struck him like a blow. Dragons did not fear easily. Behind her, half buried in the snow, something moved. Edrin's gaze shifted. A small shape lay curled against the frozen ground, its body trembling so violently that even the snow around it quivered. A hatchling. Its scales were dull, lacking the brilliance of its mother. Its wings, small, fragile things, twitched weakly against its sides. Each breath it took came in short, strained bursts, as though the air itself resisted entering its lungs. It was dying. Edrin knew that immediately. He had seen enough death to recognize it from a distance. The dragon lowered her head. Slowly, carefully, until her massive form rested closer to the ground, her posture shifting, not into a stance of attack but something else. Submission. The movement was deliberate. Intentional. She was making herself smaller. Less threatening. For him, Edrin's mind struggled to keep up. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Dragons did not come to humans. They did not ask for help. They did not. A sound broke the silence. Low, soft, almost too quiet to hear beneath the wind. A rumble deep in the dragon's chest, vibrating through the air like distant thunder. It was not a warning. It was not a growl. It was a plea. Edrin stood very still. The world narrowed to the space between them. To the great, wounded creature bowing its head in the snow. To the fragile life fatting behind her. To the choice he had thought he would never face again. His heart beat faster. Not with fear. With memory. The war surged back not in fire or steel but in feeling. In purpose. In the unrelenting pull toward those who needed him. He had spent months trying to bury that part of himself. To let it fade. To become something else. Something quieter. Something at peace. But peace, he realized, had never truly been his to keep. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward. The dragon did not move. Did not flinch. She remained as she was, head lowered, body still, eyes fixed on him with desperate intensity. Edrin stopped just beyond the doorway, the cold biting through his clothes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Two survivors. Two beings shaped by a world that had taken more than it had given. And then, Edrin made his choice. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not step back. He stepped toward the hatchling. The dragon's breath hitched. Just slightly. But she did not stop him. Did not challenge him. She simply watched. Trusted. Edrin knelt in the snow, the cold seeping through his knees, ignored. Up close, the hatchling looked even worse. Its body trembled uncontrollably, its breath shallow, its scales marred by faint, dark veins that pulsed beneath the surface. Poison, or something like it. Edrin's jaw tightened. Of course, the war, it seemed, had not ended as cleanly as the rulers claimed. It never did. He reached out slowly, carefully. His hand hovered above the hatchling for a brief moment, just long enough to feel the weight of what he was doing. Then gently he touched it. The creature flinched weakly, but did not pull away. Edrin exhaled, and in that breath something shifted. The quiet he had clung to shattered. Not violently, not painfully, but completely. For the first time in years, he knew exactly what he was meant to do. The war had returned to his door. Not as destruction, but as a chance. A chance to save something. A chance to heal. He rose, turning back toward the cottage. "Bring her," he said quietly, his voice steady despite everything. The dragon stilled. For a moment she did not move, as if she could not believe what she had heard. Then, with a care that seemed impossible for something so large, she reached back, gently gathering the hatchling in her claws. Edrin stepped aside, holding the door open. The storm swirled around them. The new year waited. And inside the small, quiet cottage, war in its truest form began again. Not to destroy, but to save. Edrin had treated men torn open by steel, their lives slipping through his fingers as fast as their blood. He had stitched wounds no one believed survivable, set bones shattered beyond reason, and dragged souls back from the brink of death with nothing but stubborn will and trembling hands. He had treated kings whose lives were deemed more valuable than thousands of others. He had treated beggars who had nothing but the breath in their lungs and the hope in their eyes. He had treated beasts twisted by war, creatures altered by magic, their forms warped into something unnatural, their pain echoing in ways that were almost human. But never this. Never a dragon's. The hatchling lay close to the hearth, where the fire's warmth wrapped around it in a fragile illusion of safety. Edrin had spread a thick wool blanket beneath its body, though the creature's own heat should have made such things unnecessary. Yet it shivered. The trembling was constant, deep, and wrong too violent for something born of flame. Its small body jerked with each breath, the motion uneven, strained, as though each inhalation was a battle it might soon lose. Edrin crouched beside it, his shadow stretching long across the floor, flickering with the uncertain firelight. Up close, the signs were unmistakable. The hatchling's scales, which should have gleamed with a healthy sheen, were dull and brittle. In some places, they had cracked entirely, exposing the sensitive flesh beneath, darkened, bruised, and faintly pulsing with something that did not belong. Its wings, thin and fragile compared to its mother's vast span, lay limp against its sides. Occasionally, they twitched, small, involuntary movements that spoke not of strength but of distress. Its eyes were half-lidded, unfocused. And its breath, too fast, too shallow, too weak. Edrin placed a hand gently against its side. Heat radiated from the hatchling, but it was not the clean, steady warmth of life. It was uneven, fluctuating, fevered in a way that made his stomach tighten. "Easy now," he murmured, the words instinctive, shaped by years of speaking to the dying. He was not sure whether the creature understood him. But that had never mattered before. The voice was not for the patient. It was for the moment. For the fragile space between life and death, where words sometimes held more power than medicine. Behind him, the dragon shifted. The sound was subtle, but it carried weight. Edrin did not turn immediately. He could feel her presence without looking, the immense coiled strength waiting just beyond the threshold. The air itself seemed to bend around her, thick with heat and restrained power. She had not entered. She could have. The doorframe would not have stopped her, the walls would not have held her back. But she remained outside, her massive form partially obscured by the storm, her head lowered just enough to see within. Watching. Always watching. Her golden eyes never left the hatchling. There was no rage in them. No threat. Only fear. Edrin had seen that look before. Not in dragons, but in soldiers. In parents. In those who stood helpless while someone they loved slipped beyond their reach. It was the same look. Pain did not care what shape a creature took. It found its way into all of them. Edrin turned his attention back to the hatchling. Carefully, he lifted one of its small forelimbs. The movement was slow, deliberate, giving the creature time to react. It barely did. Its strength was already fading. He examined the limb, his fingers tracing the lines of its scales, feeling for abnormalities. There, beneath the surface, a faint pulse. He leaned closer, narrowing his eyes. The veins beneath the scales were dark. Not merely discolored, but tainted. They carried a faint, unnatural glow, like ink spreading through clear water. The darkness moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, creeping outward from some unseen center. It was not a wound. Not an infection. Something else. Something worse. Edrin's expression hardened. Poison, he said quietly. The word felt heavy in the air. Behind him, the dragon released a low rumble. Not aggressive. Acknowledging. Edrin's gaze sharpened. He had seen poisons before. Many of them. Natural toxins drawn from plants or creatures. Alchemical mixtures designed to weaken, to paralyze, to kill. He had studied them all. Learned how they worked. Learned how to fight them. But this was different. He pressed his fingers gently against the hatchling's side, just above the faintly pulsing veins. The skin beneath the scales felt wrong. Not merely inflamed, but altered. As though something was rewriting it from within. He leaned closer, studying the pattern. The darkness was not spreading randomly. It followed the flow of the hatchling's life. Its blood, its energy, its very essence. Edrin felt a cold weight settle in his chest. This isn't natural. The words came unbidden. A statement, a realization. The hatchling let out a weak, pained sound, a thin, broken whimper that carried a faint curl of smoke with it. Not flame, not strength, just the remnants of what should have been. Outside, the dragon's response was immediate. A low growl rolled from her chest, vibrating through the ground, through the walls, through Edrin himself. Her claws dug into the frozen earth, leaving deep grooves in the snow. She did not move closer, but the tension in her body tightened, coiling like a drawn bow. Edrin closed his eyes briefly, and the past returned. Not in fragments this time. In clarity. A battlefield unlike the others. Not filled with soldiers, but with silence. An entire regiment had fallen there. Not to blades, not to fire, but to something unseen. They had come to him one by one, collapsing as they walked. No wounds, no visible injuries, just weakness. And then, darkness beneath the skin. He had watched it spread, helpless to stop it. The alchemist had called it progress. A weapon that did not rely on strength. A weapon that could kill without a fight. He had called it abomination. Edrin's eyes opened slowly. He knew this. Not the exact poison, but its nature, its purpose. It was not meant to kill quickly. It was meant to ensure death. To make recovery impossible. To turn life against itself. His gaze shifted toward the dragon. She watched him, waiting, hoping, fearing, and in that moment, he understood. This was meant for you. The words hung between them. The dragon did not react. Not outwardly, but something in her eyes changed. A flicker, recognition, confirmation. She knew. Of course she knew. Creatures like her were not caught easily. They were hunted, studied, targeted. Weapons were made for them. And this was one of them. But it had not struck its intended prey. The hatchling had taken it instead. Collateral. Edrin's jaw tightened. The war was not over. It had simply changed shape. He exhaled slowly, forcing the anger down. Anger would not help. It never had. Only action mattered now. I can't promise anything, he said quietly. He did not look at the dragon as he spoke. The words were not for her. They were for himself. For the weight he was about to take on. For the risk he was about to accept. He had made promises before. Too many. And broken them. Too often. He would not make that mistake again. But he would try. That had always been enough. Edrin rose to his feet, moving with renewed purpose. The hesitation was gone. The quiet was gone. In its place. Focus. He crossed the room quickly, setting his satchel on the table. The leather creaked softly as he opened it, the familiar sound grounding him. Inside, everything was as he had left it. Ordered. Prepared. Ready. His hands moved without thought. Selecting tools. Cloth. Small glass vials filled with dried powders and crushed leaves. He paused, just for a moment. At the bottom of the satchel lay a small, wrapped bundle. He had not touched it in years. Had sworn he never would again. Slowly he unwrapped it. Inside were darker things. Rare roots. Blackened herbs. Substances that blurred the line between healing and harm. Things he had only used when nothing else remained. When the cost of saving a life was uncertain. Edrin stared at them. The war had taught him their use. It had also taught him their consequences. Some cures left scars deeper than the wounds they healed. But this was not a wound that could be treated gently. He closed his eyes briefly, then reached for them. "Forgive me," he murmured. Whether he spoke to himself, the hatchling, or something else entirely, even he did not know. He returned to the hearths. The hatchling had grown weaker. Its movements slower. Its breathing shallower. Time was running out. Edrin knelt beside it once more. "Stay with me," he said softly. Again, the words were not for the creature. They were for the moment. He began. Hours passed. Or perhaps minutes. Time lost meaning. The world narrowed to the space around the hearth. To the fragile life before him. To the relentless presence of the poison. Edrin worked without pause. He crushed herbs. Mixed powders. Heated tinctures over the fire. Each action precise. Measured. Deliberate. He applied the first mixture carefully, spreading it across the hatchling's cracked scales, focusing on the areas where the darkness pulsed strongest. The reaction was immediate. The hatchling jerked, its body tensing violently. A sharp, pained cry escaped it. Edrin held it steady. "I knows," he murmured, "I knows." The mixture seeped into the cracks, into the flesh beneath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the darkness flared. The veins beneath the scales pulsed brighter, the black glow intensifying as though the poison resisted the intrusion. Edrin's eyes narrowed. "Good," he whispered. "Fight. If it resisted, it could be weakened. If it could be weakened, it could be broken." He prepared the second mixture. Stronger. Riskier. He hesitated only briefly before administering it. The hatchling's reaction was worse. Its body seized, its small wings thrashing uncontrollably. Flames flickered weakly from its mouth, more smoke than fire. Edrin held it firmly, his grip steady despite the violence of the movement. "Easy," he said, his voice firmer now. "Don't let it take you." Outside, the dragon roared. The sound shook the cottage, rattling the walls, sending snow cascading from the roof. It was not anger. It was terror. Pure, raw, uncontained. Edrin did not look up. He could not. If he lost focus, even for a moment, the hatchling would die. And he would not. He would not let that happen. Not again. He placed both hands against the hatchling's body, closed his eyes, and reached deeper, past the herbs, past the medicine, into something older, something he had not used in years. The air around his hands shifted. Faint light flickered against his skin, soft, pale, almost imperceptible. Magic, not the kind wielded by mages on battlefields. Not destructive, not grand, but precise, intimate, dangerous in its own way. He guided it carefully, threading it through the hatchling's body, following the path of the poison. Feeling it, understanding it. The darkness pushed back. Cold, sharp, unyielding. Edrin gritted his teeth. "You don't get to take another life," he growled. The words were low. Fierce, a promise, a challenge. He pushed harder. The light flared. The poison writhed. The hatchling screamed. And for a moment, just a moment, Edrin was no longer an old man in a quiet cottage. He was a war medic again, standing in the heart of chaos. Hands stained with blood. Soul stretched to its breaking point. Fighting, always fighting, between life and death. Only this time, he refused to lose. The night did not end all at once. It thinned, slowly, reluctantly, like a wound closing not because it had healed, but because it had no strength left to remain open. Darkness lingered in the corners of the sky, clinging to the edges of the horizon as if unwilling to surrender. The stars faded one by one, their light swallowed by the pale gray of approaching dawn. Snow still fell, but softer now, lighter, quieter, each flake drifting down with a gentleness that felt almost reverent. As though the world itself understood that something fragile was unfolding. Inside the cottage, the fire had burned low. What had once been a steady flame was now a bed of embers, glowing faintly, breathing heat in slow, uneven pulses. Shadows stretched long across the stone walls, their shapes shifting with every flicker of light. The room smelled of herbs, of smoke, of something sharper beneath it all, the lingering trace of magic, faint but unmistakable. Edrin Haveth sat beside the hearth. He had not moved in hours. Perhaps longer. Time had become something distant, unimportant, slipping past him without measure. He did not feel it. He barely felt anything at all. Exhaustion wrapped around him like a heavy cloak, dragging at his limbs, pulling at his thoughts. His hands rested loosely against his knees, fingers slightly curled as though they had forgotten how to move. Those hands, they trembled. Not visibly, not enough for most to notice. But he felt it, deep in the bones. A quiet, lingering tremor that spoke of effort pushed too far, of strength drawn from places that could not easily be refilled. He had done this before, too many times, but it had never grown easier, only more familiar. Beside him, the hatchling lay still. Too still. Its small body rose and fell with shallow breaths, each one faint, each one uncertain, as though the act of living required more strength than it could afford. The darkness beneath its scales had receded. Mostly, where once the veins had pulsed with that unnatural, creeping black, there were now only faint shadows, thin lines etched beneath the surface like scars that had not yet decided whether to fade or remain. Edrin watched those lines, watched for movement, for any sign that the poison had not been fully driven out. It had fought him, harder than anything he had faced in years. It had resisted every attempt to purge it, every effort to weaken it. It had twisted through the hatchling's body like a living thing, clinging to life with a determination that mirrored his own. There had been a moment, a single terrible moment, when he had thought he would lose. When the hatchling's breathing had faltered, its body growing cold beneath his hands, its life slipping away despite everything he had done. He had felt it, that familiar hollow drop in his chest. That moment when hope fractured, when the outcome became inevitable. He had known that feeling too well. He had lived with it, carried it, buried it beneath years of survival and stubborn defiance. But this time he had refused. He had pushed harder, deeper, beyond the limits he had set for himself, beyond the lines he had sworn never to cross again. And somehow, it had been enough. Or at least, he hoped it had. Edrin shifted slightly, the movement slow, heavy, as though his body resisted even the smallest change. His gaze drifted to the doorway. The dragon was still there. She had not moved. Not truly. Her massive form remained just beyond the threshold, her body curled protectively around the entrance, her wings partially spread as though to shield the cottage from the world beyond. Snow had gathered along her back, clinging to her scales in uneven patches, melting slowly under the faint heat of her body. Her head rested low near the ground, her great eyes fixed on the interior of the cottage. On the hatchling, she had not slept. Edrin knew that without needing to ask. Creatures like her did not rest when their young were dying. They endured. They waited. They watched, just as he had. Just as he always had. For a long time there was nothing. No movement. No change. Only the slow, fragile rhythm of the hatchling's breathing. And the quiet, heavy presence of two beings who had seen too much to trust easily in hope. Edrin exhaled slowly. His breath trembled just slightly. He closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to rest them. Just long enough to. A sound. Soft. Faint. So quiet it might have been mistaken for the shifting of embers. But Edrin heard it. His eyes snapped open. He leaned forward, his exhaustion forgotten in an instant. The hatchling had moved. Barely. A small twitch of its head. A subtle shift in its body. But it was enough. More than enough. Edrin held his breath. The world seemed to still around him, the very air pausing as though unwilling to disturb the moment. Then, another sound. A soft, fragile chirp. Weak, uncertain, but unmistakably alive. Edrin's heart lurched. The hatchling's head lifted slightly, its movement slow and unsteady, as though it were rediscovering how to exist. Its eyes, once clouded, dimmed by pain and poison, opened. And within them, light, faint, flickering, but real, life, alive. The word echoed through him, louder than any battle cry. Alive. A sound escaped him. A laugh, rough, uneven, almost broken. It rose from somewhere deep within him, from a place he had thought long since emptied. "You stubborn little thing," he murmured. The words were soft, gentle, but they carried something more. Relief, disbelief, and something dangerously close to joy. Outside, the dragon stirred. The shift was immediate, instant, as though she had felt the change before hearing it. Her head lifted, her body tensing, her gaze sharpening with sudden, fierce intensity. Edrin rose slowly, his movements careful, deliberate. Every muscle protested. Every step felt heavier than the last. But he moved anyway. He stepped past the hatchling, past the dying embers of the fire, and toward the door. The cold struck him again as he stepped outside. But it felt different now. Less biting, less hostile. The storm had quieted. The snow fell gently, no longer driven by wind, settling softly across the land in a blanket of white. The horizon glowed faintly with the first light of dawn. The new year. Edrin stopped just beyond the doorway. The dragon loomed before him, her massive form still, her golden eyes locked onto his. Waiting, hopping, fearing, he met her gaze. And for a moment, he saw not a creature of legend, not a being of fire and destruction, but something far simpler. A mother. He exhaled. She'll live. The words were simple, plain, but they carried weight. Truth. The dragon froze. Completely. As though the world itself had stopped. Then, slowly, she moved. Her great head lowered. Not in caution, not in threat, but in something far deeper. She brought it down until it touched the ground before him, her body bowing in a gesture so profound that it seemed to bend the very air around it. Submission, respect, gratitude. Edrin stood very still. He had stood before kings, before generals, before men who commanded armies and reshaped nations. None of them had ever bowed to him. Not like this. Not with such sincerity. He did not know how to respond. There were no words for this. No gestures that matched it. So he did the only thing he could. He inclined his head slightly. Not as a superior. Not as a healer. But as one being acknowledging another. It was enough. Behind him, movements. Edrin turned. The hatchling had made its way to the doorway. Its steps were uncertain, its body still weak, but it moved. Each step a victory. Each breath a testament to the battle it had survived. It paused at the threshold, blinking in the pale morning light. Then slowly it stepped into the snow. The cold did not seem to bother it. Not anymore. The dragon lifted her head slightly, her attention shifting fully to her child. She lowered her snout, nudging the hatchling gently. The touch was careful, measured, as though she feared breaking something fragile. The hatchling chirped softly in response, leaning into her. The sound that followed from the dragon was low, deep, resonant. It rolled through the air like distant thunder, not loud, but powerful enough to be felt as much as heard. Relief. Edrin watched them, and for the first time in years, something inside him shifted. It was not sudden, not overwhelming, but subtle, a loosening, a release. The weight he carried did not disappear. It never would. The war had taken too much, had carved too deeply into him. But it had not taken everything. Not yet. The dragon lifted her head. Her gaze met his once more. For a brief moment, something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, two survivors, two beings who had endured more than they should have. And then, she moved. Her wings spread, slowly at first, then fully. The motion stirred the snow, sending it spiraling into the air in a whirlwind of white. The hatchling climbed against her, small claws gripping tightly as it nestled against her body. Edrin stepped back, giving them space, giving them the sky. The dragon crouched, then leapt. The force of it shook the ground, sending a ripple through the snow. Her wings beat once, twice, and then she rose. Higher, higher still. The storm parted around her, the clouds breaking as though the sky itself made way. For a moment she circled. Not high, not far, as though ensuring something, or remembering. Then, she turned, and flew, carrying her child into the pale light of the new year. Edrin stood there long after they were gone, watching the empty sky, listening to the silence they left behind. It felt different now. Not hollow, not oppressive, but open, full of possibility. He remained there until the cold began to seep back into his bones, until the moment passed, until the world resumed its quiet rhythm. Then, he turned and walked back inside. The cottage felt smaller, quieter, but not empty. Not anymore. His gaze fell on the satchel by the door. Old, worn, waiting. He hesitated, just for a moment. Then he stepped forward and picked it up. The leather felt familiar in his hands. Comforting, heavy, real. He slung it over his shoulder. The weight settled against him like something long forgotten. And yet, right. He moved to the hearth, stirring the embers, feeding the fire once more. The flames caught, slowly, then stronger, brighter, warmer. Edrin stood there watching the fire grow. The new year had begun. Not with the peace he had hoped for, not with the silence he had sought, but with something else. Something he had not expected. Purpose. He exhaled, and for the first time in a very long while, he was ready. Because somewhere in the world, there were still lives worth saving, and he was not finished yet.